episode 80 of School Librarians United. I am your host, Amy Herman. This podcast is dedicated to the issues and challenges school librarians face every day. Having just completed my 13th year as a school librarian, I found myself asking the question, where is the podcast that will help me do my job? I wanted a podcast which addressed the nuts and bolts of running a successful library program. I don't claim to have the answers, but I hope that this is a platform to share resources and exchange ideas. Now is a perfect time to mention that all the ideas and opinions expressed in this podcast by myself, by my interview guests, and listeners who contact the podcast are our own and do not reflect those of our school districts. When incorporating research, I always make sure to cite my sources. So whether you are a novice or a veteran school librarian, this podcast is something for you. I'd like to extend a very special welcome this week to listeners Stacy in South Carolina, Danny in Ontario, Rachel, and Lisa in Michigan. I welcome you and all listeners to reach out with your feedback, episode suggestions, and questions either on Facebook, Twitter, or the email address schoollibrariansunited@gmail.com. If you include your mailing address, I will be sure to send you a podcast sticker. And to my listeners outside of the United States, rest assured I have international postage at the ready, and I love the look on my mail carrier's face when I hand over my outgoing mail. And now for today's episode, Social Emotional Learning, the New Literacy. I'm guessing it wouldn't surprise most listeners in the United States if I told you Texas and California lead the country in total episode downloads. But if you had to fathom a guess as to the state which has the third largest listener base for this podcast, I wonder if you would guess the state of Georgia. While some of this can be attributed to the recent surge in population, I will share with you the explanation I believe for this trend, and that is state leadership. Over the past 2 years of hosting School Librarians United, the publications, the articles, and the advocacy coming from Georgia has been impressive. Follow hashtag GLMA, Georgia Library Media Association, to see the evidence for yourself. Many of our school libraries around the country are experiencing a chronic problem of understaffing with paraprofessionals and perhaps one district librarian or, like me, someone who covers multiple libraries every year. And yet, great things are coming out of Georgia. That is why I was thrilled to be interviewing the president-elect for the Georgia Library Media Association for today's episode, Martha Bongiorno. I'm so excited to be sharing with you a conversation today I am lucky to be having with Martha Bongiorno. And Martha Bongiorno is the person I knew I wanted to talk to. And, to be honest, this episode should have happened much earlier this year. I just didn't have a guest in mind. Listeners had suggested to me that I have an episode on social emotional learning, and I actually gave sort of like a little shout out and asked for people who might be interested in being a guest on the show. And I learned from a listener that, Martha, you are the person I need to talk to. So thank you for sharing your expertise with us today.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to work with you and to be a part of sharing the importance of SEL in our school libraries.
SEL is the buzzword I've heard the most in staff meetings this year. And it's almost like a drinking game that every time the administration says SEL, I'm like, oh, social emotional learning, drink. But it is because many people are looking for a solution to problems they're anticipating. Martha, you have mentioned in your website the 7 mindsets in your resources. Could you expand for me the connection that there is between the 7 mindsets and social emotional learning?
So yes, SEL, social emotional learning, is definitely a buzzword in education right now, especially with remote learning. You're hearing it more and more and more. But honestly, a lot of us have been incorporating this without even realizing it. Now we're just putting a turn to what we're doing. And so for our school specifically, we're trying to teach the whole child. You've probably heard that term, the whole child. And 7 mindsets is what we've used into our curriculum. It's a systematic approach to breaking down SEL into 7 different components. I'm sure you've heard the term like everything is possible, passion first, we're connected, 100% accountable, like all these terms that they give the 7 mindsets. but it's really a series of lessons that we do throughout the course of the year. It's how you implement it that makes it SEL to me. And it makes it more relatable for our students to understand and incorporate into their daily lives. I teach at a middle school, and a lot of how we teach middle schoolers is modeling. It's direct instruction. It's putting those things into action. And 7 Mindsets gives us that opportunity. It really does a great job defining and fostering the development of these 5 interrelated concepts that the Collaborative for Academic, Social, and Emotional Learning has put out there, which if you want to get into all those details, they do have a website, but it's self-awareness, self-management, social awareness, relationship skills, and responsible decision-making, which that's teaching the whole child. It's teaching them behavior, it's teaching them social interaction, it's being aware of those things. And then when we're talking about 7 Mindsets in the library, like how do we take all of that and incorporate it in books, in our programming, in our makerspace, in our community interactions, like all these different things. So,
well, and I think what I really like is that you remind listeners that our role in the school is to support our students, is to support our staff and our administrators. And when our buildings and our districts have initiatives which are sort of binding together, or bringing together the focus of our attention and our resources, I think that cohesiveness, really that cohesive message, as it is pervasive in your building, the students will hear this familial language, this terminology, and being part of that process through your programming and your collection it reminds not only your building but your district that libraries are a key part of this whole undertaking of educating the whole child. And so I do, it's an important, because when we talk about advocacy, we can then demonstrate by showing them our program and our collection. See, you are one of the reasons why school librarians are so important is we are team players in this process. I love that. So before we get any further, because I can't wait to talk to you about all these things, would you give listeners an idea of your program, your current library, and the kinds of responsibilities you have as a school librarian?
Oh, wow. Okay. So I work at a middle school in Johns Creek, Georgia, which is northeast metro Atlanta. I've worked at this current school going on 2 years now. I had previously worked in Savannah, Georgia in Title I schools. So this was a huge jump for me. Our school is right across the street from the Atlanta Country Club and all those things. So it was a big adjustment when I came here. We have about 1,400 students, 100 plus staff. Our school is one-to-one iPads, as is all of our district for middle school and high school. Each one of our students has a one-to-one device. Our school just happens to have iPads. And as part of that, my role includes the distribution, the troubleshooting, and all that instructional technology piece, because we do not have an instructional technologist for 1,400 students and over 100 staff members. So that falls onto me, which I don't mind. That's part of being future ready. I love it. But I'm also in charge then of our library, our programming, our collection, and all of that. And I'm very lucky to have a full-time parapro who is great. She is fantastic. And so when I'm not collaborating with teachers or working on our leadership team in whatever capacity they may ask of me or that I offer, despite, all the things that we're doing, I host a ton of book clubs. So we have our Literacy Alliance book club, which is based on that Project Lit Read Woke movement. We have a Helen Ruffin Reading Bowl team. I have a technology club that meets once a week, and we compete at the state level tech competition. I have a SWAT team, which is students working to advance technology, and I work with them on a daily basis, and they help troubleshoot, and they help go out into classrooms and teach teachers. So it's like an extension of me. So I teach the teacher kind of thing, and they're fantastic. And then I have a student library advisory board that helps me with programming and displays and all that kind of stuff. And then as far as programming, we do a 40-book challenge every year to try to expand our students' palette and what we're reading and teachers. So one of the resources I sent you, Amy, was this 40-book challenge poster, and that's on my website, and I print those off for teachers, and they have them outside their doors, and they try to compete throughout the year. We have a maker space that's pretty robust. It's low tech, middle tech, high tech, all the things. And then throughout the year, we bring in authors, connect students with scientists, museums, community leaders through Skype. We host poetry slams, open mic mornings. There's a lot that goes into my job and what I do during the day. So any given day, it's going to be different.
I'm sure the next email that somebody's writing the podcast right now is that we need to do a follow-up episode on your programming. So, that sounds wonderful. And I could spin off and ask you about all of those. Today's focus is going to be social emotional learning. And you and I can explore opportunities in season 3 to delve more into some of the opportunities that you have, because I love that you have opportunities for kids to shine. You have opportunities for kids to become invested in your program. And I think that's key. And, and the value that you bring to your building, is evident in all the programming that you're offering. That's fantastic. I want to pivot just for a second to your website. This is amazing. When you talk about going down the rabbit hole, friends, I went down the rabbit hole of her website. It is amazing. It's a treasure trove of school librarians. It's called Discovering Remarkable, and I will include a link in the show notes. You're incredibly generous with your resources and the programming ideas that you include. Clearly, maintaining your website is really important. Sometimes I think that's something we don't make a priority as librarians.
Yeah, I try to push our students and our teachers to go there for resources. But if you're talking about being open with all of my resources and programming ideas, school librarians, we're all in this together. And I'm a big proponent of open educational resources. And if you've done amazing things that have helped your students, maybe it's going to help somebody else. I definitely don't keep up with my blog the way I wish I did. Like every Monday I'm posting a new blog post that you hear about. But it is what it is, and I share the good things when you have time, right? So
right. I would like to specifically, because we are in the summer months, wherever you are in your sort of, I apologize to our Australian and New Zealand listeners who are getting ready for winter, but for the majority of our listeners, we are at some place in our summer vacation. And but I do want to direct listeners to one area, and that is the 7 Mindsets book lists for middle schoolers and young adults. Because I think as librarians, we're always looking for great ideas for the kinds of books we're reading in the summertime. And I love this because you have all of these different mindsets. You have attached 6 recommendations for each of these mindsets. And friends, whether or not you embrace the 7 mindsets, these are really top-notch recommendations for titles. And I love that when you've done this, I'm like, wow, I really don't have to go anywhere else. This reading list, I'm going to pat myself on the shoulder a little bit because I have read quite a few of these, but haven't read all of them. And I'll tell you, as somebody who really wants to broaden my reading experience, and it is neat because I was at the Connecticut Nerd Camp last week, the virtual one, and Barbara D. was there. And yes, and so was Dusty Bowling. So I was having quite a day as alongside the Connecticut attendees. And so as a Michigander, I was very much appreciating the opportunity that we had because it was virtual. It was a virtual experience, and I got to firsthand see these authors speak to us about the importance of the books that they have written. And so friends, if you are looking for summer reading, and many of these are in audiobook format as the I can attest to. So I just want to throw that out there, friends. You wrote, quote, SEL doesn't take place in just one lesson or with one program. It's how and why we support our learning community continuously throughout the year, end quote. I'd love to hear you expand on that.
So if you're talking about the definition of SEL, and you're talking about what social emotional learning is. That's the official term that's given by CASEL, which is the Collaborative for Academic, Social, and Emotional Learning. They define SEL as how children and adults learn to understand and manage emotions, set goals, show empathy for others, and establish positive relationships and make responsible decisions. So if you're talking about SEL as like this concept of consistently learning, which you don't just learn one thing, you have to put it into action and constantly practice something in order to learn it. It can't be done in just one lesson. It is something that you have to keep going back to, that is continuous over the year. I'm also partial to this idea of calling SEL social emotional literacy, because the school librarians were known for teaching literacy in all different forms. So we talk about teaching digital literacy, information literacy, all the way to traditional reading and writing, as we know as a literacy. And at the end of the day, we want our students to be literate individuals, and that's a journey that never ends. So if we're talking about literacy, though, being defined as like this broad term as a way to communicate more effectively, or this idea of competence or knowledge in a specified area, literacy kind of takes on this very broad term for school librarians, and that's how we fit all this into our job description, right? So if you break down social emotional learning, emotional literacy implies that there's a certain level of skill in reading emotions, recognizing and interpreting our own feelings and those of others. And then you talk about social literacy, and that implies a level of skill in being able to form respectful relationships with other people. It includes like this idea of sharing with others and allowing yourself and them to be real with one another, beyond stereotypes and beyond labels. And we're seeing this so much more now in current events, right? So to me, when we're talking about something that we should not be teaching just one day, we teach literacy throughout the year. Learning happens throughout the year. So SEL to me then translates to something that you should be incorporating and embedding throughout the year. It's not something that just happens once.
I like the intentionality of that, because when you make this part of your program, you are making a commitment that that not only your students will benefit from throughout the year, but your administrator will see just how you are playing a part in promoting these positive messages. And hopefully the families are also seeing this. And, you mentioned about, especially now, we've just come off of, some of us, we're teaching virtually for 3 months, and 3 solid months. And I think that we're going to have some cleanup at the other end when we get these kids back in the fall.
Yes.
And that for us, in my experience, is where I'm hearing a lot of this, is that when we get these kids back in the fall, we're going to need to include a lot of social emotional learning to bring and sort of help our students adjust to a different normal.
Yeah. So if we're talking about going back to school, thinking about how we can incorporate this into our library programming, libraries are the heart of the school, and we are advocates of change and modeling for our teachers and our students like how this should happen. Teachers are going to be worried about how do we get our students back on track and all these things. And we do have a little more flexibility in the library to expand on this idea of SEL. At our school, I have a before school time where we start at 8 o'clock instead of 9 o'clock. And so we use that whole hour before to do clubs, to do open mic mornings, to do like come together sessions. So utilizing your time well and thinking about it now is really going to help you so that you can model for your teachers and your students from day one, like how can we connect again, like on an emotional level. They need that place to feel safe.
Well, and not only did we not, everyone, for many of your students in the middle school, they're starting off in a new building, but they never said goodbye to their old one. and I think, for me, that is something that is going to have to be acknowledged. But I do love that. I wanted to mention to listeners, and I'll mention this several times, the wealth of resources in the show notes. If you wanted to make incorporating SEL a priority into your library, this episode is a gift because of the resources that Martha has generously shared. When I said to her, hey, do you have anything you want to share on the podcast in terms of links that might be helpful to listeners? My God, she sent so many resources. It was amazing. So I will say this, and I'll say this again. Be sure you check out the links in the show notes, because Martha has clearly shared with us the majority of the things that have really sort of helped her usher this into her own school program. Martha, you co-authored an article with Sarah Sansbury, and of course, I've included a link in the show notes. Social emotional learning is supported both in our collections as well as our programming. So let's first address how we incorporate SEL into our collection development, because you shared a terrific Wakelet about this. But I'd love to hear how you went about doing this.
So yeah, our article, thank you for mentioning Sarah. She's an amazing person to get to know too. So if you're looking for resources, she has other articles to go back to as well. And so when we were talking about this article, we wanted to try to break down SEL into the lowest components, right? Like, how can we take this and offer the most resources if this is what you're trying to start? And we started talking about bibliotherapy was our first section. And that's kind of this idea that, you know, you're using your book collections as a way to learn and grow. And then we start talking about our programming and how you can incorporate SEL in terms of the interactions in the community that you're developing within your space.
Terrific. When it comes to bibliotherapy, I'm just going to ask for clarification because I truly do not know. Do you find that these words SEL and bibliotherapy are used interchangeably? Because my understanding is not all bibliotherapy is necessarily SEL.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that. So I'm not a counseling, I'm not a counselor. I haven't gone to school and majored in social emotional learning. This is all things that I've been learning in my time in education and across the schools that I've been in. And it's really the heart of what I try to do is these connections with your students and your teachers and things like that. Bibliotherapy is important to consider, like a broader term. So it really did start off as this idea of therapy, like from an actual therapy session where you would read books about mental health to kind of self-affirm yourself and learn and grow. And so when you're dealing with issues such as anxiety and depression or coping with grief, sometimes it's really difficult to make sense of that in both your mind and your body. So bibliotherapy kind of aims to bridge that gap using literature, because the more you read about stories, the more you learn about yourself, right?
Yeah.
Sarah and I take this idea of bibliotherapy and really stretch it in a way to not only understand oneself, but also understand other people's journeys. Mm-hmm. So I'm sure we've all heard this Bishop quote that books are sometimes windows. They offer views to other worlds. They're sliding glass doors, and they're mirrors as well. So if you use that quote and you really think about what books can offer ourselves, I think that is the direction that we went with that. So literature transforms that human experience and reflects it back to us. Mm-hmm.
Well, and when it comes to like looking through windows, I know right now I'm finishing an audiobook. I have 20 minutes left, but it's When Stars Are Scattered, and it talks about the Somali refugee experience. And I can't think of a better book to help our students reconfigure their perspective, because I think as a parent and as an educator, I have all too often seen that our students lose perspective when it comes to just all the blessings they have in this life, and they just cannot conceive of anybody whose life is harder or more disappointing. And, reading about this or listening to this experience about the Somali refugee crisis has been absolutely an experience, because it really does help you reframe your own perspective. I want to also, let's see, blah, 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 blah. Okay.
Can I expand on that just a little bit?
Absolutely. Please go ahead.
So when you're talking about elementary students, middle school students, it starts to wane when you get to high school, but we're all a little selfish, right? We're all living in our own little bubble of reference and experiences. So when you're talking about these bibliotherapy books on a broad term, it really does expose our students and our teachers, to be honest, about these other perspectives, and really opens up your eyes. And our kids are amazing, resilient creatures, right? They are amazing. And they're all, one of the things that makes middle schoolers my favorite age to teach is that once they learn about something and they're exposed to something, they want to do something about it. They take on this idea of social justice and run with it. They just need the guidance and the permission to take risks in a healthy way, based off what they've read, based off these experiences and discussions that go with it, right?
Well, and that's a nice pivot, because you implement programming which allows your students to have that kind of positive impact on their community. So I want to make sure that we talk about some of those things that you have given your students opportunities to do, because you do recognize that students, when they're motivated, we should be channeling this energy in a way that is productive and gives them the kind of confidence to move forward in all aspects of their life. You've provided a wealth of resources. I'm going to include all of those in the show notes on how to foster social emotional learning and literacy in our library programs. Would you share with listeners some of your empathy building projects which you have included in your library this year?
So I kind of look at this and call it a human-focused approach to our library programming. And I think that's done with collaboration with teachers as much as it is what we do with our Student Library Advisory Board and building just programs that happen in the library. So 2 big projects that I've worked on with teachers. We try to make them interdisciplinary units, get students involved as much as possible. And it's a project that goes over a period of weeks or months. So the first one we did was Long Walk to Water. I'm sure many of us have read that in middle school. It's a fantastic book. Many of us have read it for good reason. And our students, this is where empowering our students is so important. So it started off as a book that we were just reading. We were going to do, like a hyperdoc and do research with it and just kind of, do your typical interdisciplinary unit where you come up with an action, but nothing really happens, with time constraints and things like that. And with traditional schooling, that tends to be where we're at. And our students didn't want that. They wanted to go above and beyond. They were like, no, we really want to make a difference. So they created PSAs, public service announcements. They did it on paper. They created infographics. They created videos. They just went and ran with it. And they felt empowered enough to come to the teachers and say, no, we really want to do something. So we invited Water is Basic, which is actually a local Johns Creek organization, but they work with South Sudan towns and things like that to bring wells to their area. And luckily, because we're so community-based, I knew this parent that was a part of this organization. So it actually worked out really nicely. And she came in, shared how these wells were built, how much it costs, like why we can't just say, all right, everybody gets a well in their area, that there's so much more to this. And they just went with it with their PSAs. They raised money, and they eventually were able to build an entire well in one town. And it was just from start to end, it was an entire semester's worth of work that really was supposed to take 6 weeks, and it just transformed our entire lives for an entire semester. And it was amazing to watch students take this idea that they got from a book and decide to do something about it and put it into action. And then in 8th grade, I mentioned too, so our 8th grade ELA teacher came to me, and she has this group called Strong Girls, which is about empowering our 8th grade girls to, go out in the world, do things with their lives, like find your passion in life. It doesn't matter what it is, just find your passion and run with it. And she wanted a book that kind of helped her approach some current events that the students had brought up in her club about the Me Too movement. And we went right back to Barbara D's book, Maybe He Just Likes You. And so instead of just doing it with her girls group, we ended up doing that with her 8th grade ELA classes. And it was an amazing project that was supporting empathy building in relation to women's rights in society. It was great to get all perspectives, right? Not just in our a Strong Girls group, although we did discuss it with girls only in that group so that, we can open up a little bit more. So we were cognizant of that, but we also had these discussions in class so that we could get multiple perspectives. So with my tech knowledge, I was able to help her and her vision with the tech tools appropriate, connect the class to Barbara D for asking her authentic questions, putting that into action with their project. And what they ended up creating was this Wakelet of resources to support students and teachers who are wanting to learn more about what Me Too is, especially with all these rumors that what it is, wasn't it, what it isn't. And we actually found out there's a Me Too K-12 movement, which was really fascinating. So they put all that into place. I was just there. Here's a fantastic book, here's some great tech resources. And again, the kids kind of ran with it and said what they wanted to do with the project. So,
well, and I cool. As a parent of, I have a daughter and 2 sons, and the hashtag Me Too movement has been something which not just teachers recognize is important to address, but parents have recognized that there's a great deal of educating when it comes to supporting our students and how they treat one another. I like that this conversation wasn't just to the girls in your school, but it included their classmate, the boys in the class, because it is a very big concern as we raise these young adults. And to have these conversations as early as the middle school is important because students need to recognize these issues before they get to the high school. And I really think that doing it in a way that is led by educators and done in a very mindful way, and not something that's just being discussed in the locker rooms or when they're walking home from school or they're out, at lunch. This is really important, the kind of growing that our students are doing thanks to introducing them to a book.
Yes, I agree. And it does. It sits on me. I have a young boy we're raising, and he has an older sister who's going into middle school. So this idea of the Me Too movement and just talking about how we interact with one another and breaking this down into responsible decision-making, relationship skills, self-awareness, all these components of SEL, right?
But I do think parents would be appreciative that they're not the only ones who are concerned about and embrace the responsibility of raising adults who respect one another.
I agree with you completely because, we're in the job of raising children too. We're in the job of preparing them for the real world, helping them be comfortable in their skins, follow their passions and all of these things, right? And they need those skills, these relationship skills, responsible decision-making skills as they move forward and become these individuals they're going to be. We have a huge role in shaping these students, and they're with us the majority of the day. It was a little awkward at first, I'm not going to lie, talking about Me Too, standing in front of these 8th grade girls and boys and, our friends across the class. I'm not going to lie, I was a little red in the face at times, but these conversations need to happen, especially when you're doing it age appropriately. Like, we're not, we're being cognizant of the words we're saying, but at the end of the day, these conversations need to happen. And having your parents on board, taking this a step farther, and you're talking about programming, you could have had a roundtable discussion with parents. Invite parents to read the book too. Don't be fearful and let that fear hold you back from having these conversations.
Well, and I think that you're more likely to have parents on board if they have some sort of introductory explanation as to what's going to be discussed and what's going to be shared. Because when they feel like they're part of this process, they're more likely to embrace it. I love that you, I want to make sure that we talk a little bit about your makerspace, because it's, and I do want to go back to these conversations that are difficult that we have with our students in a minute, but you mentioned your makerspace and how you're using your makerspace to support our students' social emotional learning. Could you give us an example of how you've done that?
Thank you for mentioning this. I love our makerspace. It's one of my favorite things that we do. I actually read a book a couple years ago by Gina Seymour, or Seymour. I'm sorry if I'm saying that incorrectly. When you read, sometimes the words don't come out correctly. But she talks about this idea of a compassionate maker program. And so we've taken that and I've kind of broken it down in how compassionate makers or maker care programs support SEL on another level that maybe you haven't thought about before. So we focus our compassionate making program around our 7 mindsets. So we focus on this idea of live to give and how it embodies the idea of creating in order to help others and foster civic action. So if you are looking for ideas on how to include something like this, Gina Seymour has fantastic resources out there. And I've posted some to my blog on the Discovering the Remarkable website as well. For example, my biggest suggestion would be to find a need in your community and partner that with your students' passions. So I have a group of girls who absolutely love to sew. I don't know where they just came to me and they're like, I sew dresses on the side. Can we incorporate that in the makerspace? And I was like, have you thought about how your sewing could help other people? And within 10 minutes, we're like, oh my goodness, what can we be doing? So we started off small. We created sleeping mats for a homeless shelter near Atlanta that was accepting donations. You always need to check with these community organizations. They may not be looking for donations, even though you really want to give them. So just check with your community organizations first. We've made worry monsters for our local domestic abuse shelter, and this is near and dear to my heart, having experience with domestic abuse. And so that was something I was able to talk about with our students when we're creating these worry monsters and normalizing that conversation that these things happen, that support is needed. And these worry monsters were able to help the children that were part of these shelters. And then, if you're into animal shelters, maybe you could create dog toys out of scraps of fabric for your local humane society, or maybe your student has a pet organization. You don't know. Just don't be afraid to ask and put those feelers out. If you're just getting started and you have a very low budget, I've been there, I totally understand. Having a permanent card station is a really great idea. You can make cards for veterans, local hospitals, assisted living communities. Think about, so my mother-in-law is going through lung cancer, chemo treatments, and things like that. And one of the things that she appreciates is when people reach out to her and offer her support and encouragement, because that's a dark time for people. And so offering the ability to write cards, just encouraging cards, not feel better, So we've learned that by mistake. Don't say feel better, saying you've got this, like you're a strong person, things like that. And if you want to take that a step farther and you do have the budget or a PTA that possibly could fund these maker care projects, you could then sew blankets or, knit blankets together to donate to the local chemo treatment places around your area. So it's really about examining your organizations around you, community, the needs that you're seeing, and partner that with what your students love to do. Because they want to do it. Just give them a chance to do it.
I love how organic this is, because the kind of programming you're talking about will be different in everyone's building, because it reflects not only your community needs, but also the strengths and interests of your students. So what a fantastic way to allow the kids to use their skills in a way that helps your community address struggles, personal struggles, social struggles. I really love all of these ideas. I want to make sure that we ask this question because I've looked at collaborating with educators, but it seems to me like SEL in our libraries invites a whole new opportunity to collaborate now with the counseling department. Could you speak a little bit? You mentioned it earlier, but most school librarians, I imagine, did not come to this profession having previously been school social workers or school counselors. So can you tell us how you've been able to partner with your counseling department?
I love our counselors. We're very lucky to have 3 different counselors, 1 per grade level. And so I think it starts with building relationships. First of all, you would build relationships with your front office staff, your administration, your teachers. So it's about getting to know them and their individual strengths. For me, I work very well with our 6th grade counselor. She and I are very much alike in how we think and approach life and education and all these things. So I partnered with her through most of our programs. And 2 ideas that you can take with right now are the idea of National Suicide Awareness Month and Mental Health Awareness Month. I think this gives you both a common ground to talk about and give you something to start working towards. So when it comes to these 2 months, we collaborate on resources that we share out, books that touch on these topics. She knows the subject, but I've read countless books that I can offer and say, hey, maybe we could do a book study with this group of students. Like if you have students we know are cutting themselves, which is a really tough topic, but books kind of help with that, right? This idea of bibliotherapy. And then we host lessons and lunch and learns during these months to help students recognize the signs of suicide from your friends or maybe yourself, and normalizing mental health with our students. So because these are heavy topics, having an expert like your counselor makes for an epic collaboration to support you and your teachers and your students. A really fun program if tough topics are not for you and it's really hard to ease, that is a lot to just jump into. A really fun program to start with is World Kindness Day. So we're aware of this day as this day to wear cardigans, represent Fred Rogers, and, I'll spread kindness, spread the love. But with a collaboration with your counselor and teachers, you can take it above and beyond that. So that's what we did this year. We were able to take this day and make it an entire week in order to talk intentionally about kindness and the importance of it and how we can put it into action. So that putting it into action part is really important to our school, to me personally. So we read and discussed Wonder with our entire 6th grade. It's a great, easy book to read that gives lots of opportunities for discussion about kindness. We worked with our student council to complete random acts of kindness every day throughout the week. We held, in our makerspace, we had a Kindness Rocks station set up. I went to our local Home Depot. They donated all the rocks. I cleaned them off. We ordered paint pens, and students just came in every day painting rocks all day, and we're hiding them all around the school. It was so much fun. And then we created a kindness wall of quotes where students asked what kindness meant to them, and they had all these quotes written around the building. So, I mean, it was a great day, a great week to spread joy and love and this idea that we're all working on the same team. And none of it could have been done without the impact of a collaboration, without the counselors, me, and willing teachers. So teamwork really makes the dream work.
I do like the brainstorming component, because brainstorming with yourself is not fun. Before I let you go, I want to make sure we touch upon this idea of tough topics for teens, and how you included one of these in your resources for us, but how to locate these. It's not just enough to show students where to find materials in the library to address tough topics that our students are embracing. And I think it when we help our students with, social emotional literacy, we may find ourselves having being asked questions that might be tough topics for us to be addressing with our students. Can you give some advice to a librarian who might not necessarily have the confidence you do in these conversations that we're having with our students?
I'm really glad you asked this question, Amy. I think it's hard to ignore the fact that I work in Georgia. I've worked in rural Georgia, and it is really hard to have these conversations in a very conservative state. So I completely understand where this is coming from. I think my confidence comes from it, and I have to tell myself to be confident, to be honest. But at the end of the day, we're in the business of supporting students. The students are the reason that we are here. And if you can lead with that in mind and you love your students, you will find the confidence and find the ability to overcome that fear of having these conversations. So, supporting our students, all of our students, let's be honest, all of our students. It's not always going to leave you in a happy place with your colleagues or your administration. There have been numerous times I've been called to the carpet and I've had to defend the books that I include on the shelves, the programming that we offer. I mean, I have been called to the carpet about our LGBTQ books, including a Muslim author to visit, reading Percy Jackson with our 6th grade class at some point. And then we have book clubs that examine police brutality. I've been called to the carpet about any number of things. But my advice to you, if you are in the shoes that I have been in, to learn as much as you can about the resources that are out there, arm yourself with data, the organizations that are already there, and collaborate with teachers who are willing to support your students too. So that does take work. If you're finding yourself in a position where you cannot spread your wings as far as you would like them to go, start small. So this year, I really wanted to start working with our parent community, and I created the Lions Literacy Alliance. And it was based off the idea of Project Lit and Read Woke, but I do work in a very conservative Metro Atlanta community. And so we talked earlier about parents being on your side about things and kind of easing them into these discussions. And that was my way of doing this. So our Lions Literacy Alliance was meant to have a discussion surrounding Project Lit books, these Read Woke books, with parents, teachers, and students all coming together to read the book and have discussions. And it went off pretty well this year. And I think it's going to be even better next year. I'm already having emails from students and teachers asking what books are going to be on our list for next year. So I am excited about the direction, but at the same time, I had teachers who are like, I cannot believe you're reading Trevor Noah's books with your kids. So you're always going to have somebody somewhere attack you or the message you're supposedly sending to your students. It's not an easy road, but it's crucial if we're supporting a positive, welcoming environment for our learning community. Do not let fear keep you from doing what's right. Arm yourself with data, organizations, and call me if you need it.
Friends, I am going to let our expert have the last word because I have spent most of this interview. I'm glad you can't see me, listeners, with my jaw dropped like, I'm just going to let her, you just go ahead and keep on talking, Martha, because I can't do what you are doing right now with the passion that you have, because I don't come at this with the same perspective. You are a gem. I'm going to put you on the spot and make you promise to come back to the show next season 3, because I really can't think of a more impassioned guest to bring on and share the messages that you have about how we raise our students in the way we can through our library programs. Martha, would you please share with us, because I know a lot of people would like to follow you on social media if they aren't already. Please tell us how we can find you on social media.
Well, thank you so much, Amy, for having me. I am blushing like you would not believe. I mentioned earlier when we were talking, I'm such an awkward individual at times, but that helps me connect with my kids, right? But I would love to come back. I would love to share. I am an open resource. If anybody wants to connect with me, I'd love to talk about it and collaborate with you. So you can find me on Twitter. I'm at Mrs._Bongi, Bongi. You can find our Instagram is Mrs._Bongiorno, Bongiorno. And then, you can connect with me at any point.
Wonderful. Well, friends, I can't tell you how much fun this is. I'm on summer vacation doing exactly what I want to be doing right now. And I have learned so much from this conversation. Martha, I hope you have some fun plans ahead of you. And I look to contact you in the fall, and we can talk about collaborating again.
That sounds wonderful. Thank you so much, Amy.
Thank you. I am so grateful to Martha for taking a break from her summer vacation to share with us today. As I said during our interview, our show notes are incredibly comprehensive. If social emotional learning is something you would like to build and foster in your own library program, take a look at the terrific resources Martha was so generous to share with us today. If you found this episode helpful, please share it out with your team, your PLN, and on social media. Next week's episode will be our Season 2 finale and my conversation with Wendy Cope. I hope you will tune in.